So today's lesson is on graphing linear relations using technology. So what we've been doing so far in class in creating our scatter plots has been using graph paper and graphing by hand. And there are some definite advantages to that, but also some disadvantages. Today I'm going to provide you with a different tool that you can use if you want to make graphs that may or may not work better than graphing by hand. So let's start by just identifying some of the pros and cons of graphing by hand versus graphing using technology, using graphing software. So when I think about graphing by hand, I know that if I were really forced to, I could probably create a graph just about anywhere if I was motivated to do it. So it's fairly convenient. I don't need a computer. I don't need electricity. Understandably, before computers came along, that was the only way to graph, really. But I know if you're like me, you find graphing by hand to be kind of time-consuming and, prone to mistakes. It can be messy if you're a messy person. The pencil marks can smudge, and if you make a mistake, then you have to kind of start all over, often. So now, graphing using technology, I love graphing using technology. I think that if you do have a computer, that it's a great way to go, because it keeps things neat and organized. You can edit it without having to restart. You can save it and then pull it up later, so you don't have to worry about losing that piece of paper with the graph on it. Okay, some cons though, however, it really means that you need to know about how to use the software first, and there's a bit of learning that has to happen, and we're going to go through that today in this lesson. And also that it requires a computer, and depending on the program you need, you also need the internet. So it is limited in certain ways. I think now we're ready to take a look at one type of technology that will allow you to graph that's part of the Google Apps for Education. It's called Google Sheets. So I'm going to pull up an example, and working through that example, I'll show you how to use Google Sheets to create beautiful scatter plots. So here is an example. So I would say that moving forward, yesterday in class we learned about lines of best fit, and we learned about extrapolating or extending your line of best fit so you can figure out some information that you didn't collect data for. So in questions where you might have to draw a line of best fit, it's always a good idea to read the entire question first, because sometimes if you create your graph at the beginning without knowing that you have to extend your graph won't be large enough to allow you to extrapolate. So just a suggestion, we're gonna do that today. So the question says, the operator of an ice cream truck keeps track of how much ice cream is sold on days with different temperatures. She records the sales for the past 10 days. So here I have the temperature in degrees Celsius, and I have the sales in dollars, right, in dollar amount. So notice that the units are at the top of the table. I don't need to put the units all the way through on this table. So the first question says, develop a hypothesis for the relationship between temperature and sales. We'll get back to that. Create a scatter plot using technology and insert a line of best fit. I'm going to show you how to do all of that using the graphing software today. The weather forecast says the temperature will be 35 degrees today. Estimate the sales the operator will have today. So I'm going to look at my data now, and I can see that when I look at the different temperatures, the highest value that I have so far is 25.8 degrees. So if I create a graph that's just a little bit larger than that, say like, maybe 30, then it's not going to be large enough to help me figure out what the amount of money will be if that they'll make if the temperature is 35 degrees Celsius outside. So I'm going to remember that when I'm creating my graph. If the operator were to make $500, what would you estimate the temperature to be that day? So I'm going to just look and see how much money. Oh, looks like they made $698 one day, and so $500 will be within the data that's already there, so I don't have to take that into account when deciding how big to make my graph. Now I want to touch base with you about this term hypothesis and make sure that you're familiar with it. So a hypothesis is simply an educated guess, right? So whenever I am looking at some information, I want to use my own judgment and also what I know about the world and make a reasonable guess about what the relationship might be. So in this case, I'm looking at see how the sales depend on the temperature outside. So within my experience, most people in the dead of winter are not interested in having ice cream cones outside. Whereas in the summertime, that's when in Muskoka some of our ice cream shops open up and they're quite busy. So I'm going to write a statement that describes what I think the relationship will be. Okay, the higher the temperature, the more ice cream, more money will be made by selling ice cream cones. There are other ways that you could have worded that. That's just simply the way that I'm wording it. Some of you might instead have said, as the temperature increases, so will the amount of money made from ice cream. So those are both really good. Now we're at the point where we want to make our scatter plot. So I'm going to stop this and extend my screen so that you can see how I'm maneuvering to get to the software program. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my Google Drive, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to this new button, click on it, and instead of going to Google Docs like you probably 90% of the time do, I'm going to go to this Google Sheets and I'm going to open it up. And what I see here is what's called a spreadsheet. I have a number of cells. You can sort of see it looks like a table where I can create a table of values, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. Each of these little squares is called a cell. So if you hear somebody refer to it as a cell, that's what we mean. So I'm going to write in my data here. So when I go back to the example, when I go back to my example, here it is, and I know that temperature is my independent variable and sales is my dependent variable. Again, the sales depend on the temperature outside. So I'm going to put my temperature in the first column. It's going to go on my horizontal axis. So temperature and degrees Celsius. I'm going to extend this a little bit to my column fits. And then I'm going to put that against my sales in dollars. So I'm including my units there so I don't forget about them. And then I'm going to go back to the question and find out my information. So when it is 14.4 degrees Celsius out, the sales are $215. So I'm going to input that into my data. There we go. So there they are. I'm going to pause the video and get to my entire list of data, and so that you don't have to waste time seeing me input it, I think that you know how to go from there. So in the meantime, what I've done is I've input my data. I'm going to guess that for you guys, if you were to input it, that this 0 wouldn't show. And so there's a way for that to make that show up. What you do is you highlight, so I want all of my decimal places to be consistent. If you had typed this in simply as 19, as it is up here, it wouldn't automatically go and have the 0 put in. So I'm going to show you how I made it so that it would show the one decimal place for all of my numbers. So here I would highlight that value, I would go format, my number, and I'm going to go down to more formats and custom number format. And when I do that, I can pick the number of decimal places that I want to be there. So for instance, if I wanted 2 decimal places, then I would pick that. If I didn't like anything that I saw, I could make up my own. So then I would apply that, and then I should see all of my data being nice and consistent. All right, now I'm ready to create my chart. So the first thing that you need to do is highlight the data that you want to go on the chart. And then you're going to either do a couple of things. You can go to Insert in your toolbar and Chart, or you can simply see that there's like this same quick button here in my toolbar. It looks like a bar graph, and I'm just going to click on it. And when I do that, this chart pops up. I'm going to make that a little smaller. Now, sometimes they make recommendations for you, and they're not always great ones. So I'm going to show you how you would go about selecting the exact type of graph that you want. We've been doing scatter plots, and that's what I want. And they've selected that for me, but in case they hadn't, I can go to Chart Types. And then I can scroll down till I see scatter plot, and there, select it. Next, I want to go to Customization. And that's where you get to make the graph your own to make sure all the details that need to be there are there. Because of the titles I chose, they automatically put in a title for me. So it's always my dependent variable versus my independent variable in those titles. So I don't like these $sign and units for temperature. They're important in my labels on my axes, but not so much in my title. If I wanted to, I could go and mess around with the type of font color, whether I wanted it bold or not, the font size, if I wanted it larger or not, and so on and so forth. Now, I want to focus on this legend here, okay? So a legend, and notice when I sort of hover over it, they get highlighted. A legend, really, you need a legend if you have 2 or more lines on the same graph, right? So like for instance, if I had a line graph like these with 2 different lines, I'd want to color each line a different color and then use a legend to say, well, which piece of information is referring to what, right? Sorts things out, makes it clear to the reader. But I only have 1. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm just going to click on legend and say that I don't want 1 at all. And now you see it disappear. I can change the background color, but you want to be careful not to distract from the data itself. See, if I put a red background, I can hardly see my data points. So I'm going to recommend that you use a really light shade, if at all. I'm going to quickly show you how this maximize function works. By pressing the maximize function, then my graph, I lose my titles and they come up here, and I don't really like that. So I'm going to suggest to you that you don't do that, so that now we can see clearly where our labels are. So now I'm ready to look at my axes, right? So notice that here, axis horizontal. So that is this axis right here. And now I'm going to be able to add some customization to it. So because I added a header at the top of my column in my cells on my spreadsheet, it's already there for me. But if not, if I'd forgotten to do that, I could always add it here after the fact. I can change the color and the font size of my information and my title. Sometimes you have really long numbers for each tick mark, and you want to slant them so that they all fit nicely. So here, for example, that's not the case here, so I'm just going to go with auto, and it's going to place them nicely in line. So I could add little labels if I wanted to each of my data points. Right here, this is a really useful function because it tells me that I can change my scale, right? So this current graph is going from 0 all the way up to 30, right? So the min means minimum number on the scale, and max means maximum number on the scale. So I want it to start at 0. But I want my maximum number to go beyond 30, because when I go back to the question that we were looking at, I want to know at 35 degrees Celsius how much money I'm going to make. So I'm going to go back, and I'm going to make my maximum value above the 35, because I don't want my dot to be right at the edge here. I'm going to go a little bit above my, my highest value. So let's try 40. And so as soon as I do that, you can see that the data shifts. I still have my units, my increments going up by 10, which is great. If it wasn't a really nice increment, I could always change that though, and I'm going to show you how to do that. You do that with grid lines, and you do that by messing around with your scale. These grid lines are really helpful because they help to guide you. I think that having 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 grid lines is not enough. I want to have a grid line at every 5 units, right? Every 5 degrees Celsius. So that means I need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 grid lines, major grid lines, instead of just 5. So I'm going to change that. And now you can see that I have it going up by 5s. Now, you know, there might be degrees in between that you also might want to find out. And so I would personally add a few minors. So if I want to have a minor every 1 unit or 1 degree Celsius, then I can add 1, 2, 3, 4 grid lines. And then I know that each space represents 1, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now I'm at 5. So now that I'm done my horizontal axis, I can go ahead and click on left vertical. I've actually already done that, and I've gone in and changed the scale to what I would like it to be and added in some appropriate grid lines. So the last thing that needs to be done, and this to me is the neatest part, is I can add in a line of best fit. So if you scroll down from where the axis stuff is in the grid lines, and you scroll all the way down to trend line, a trend line is basically some kind of a line of best fit. So there are such things as linear trend lines, an exponential trend line, and polynomial. Those are all just different types. So let's look at them. So linear, the word line is in there. So there's my line of best fit. Exponential, I can see that curves it. Doesn't seem to fit the trend, not liking it. And then there's polynomial, better, but still not great. So I'm going to go back to my linear fit because I think that this is a linear relation. So I'm going to just scroll up a bit here, and I can see that the color is the same as the color choice for the data point. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to change that. If I wanted to, I could make the line, more see-through so it doesn't show up as much, or I can make it 100% opaque, right? So it doesn't really matter. You can change the line thickness. I like how it is. Those are all things that you can do to customize your graph to make it what you would like it to be. So I am going to create that by pressing the Update button or the Create button. Now I'm ready to copy and paste this in to my questions so I can verify. So I'm going to go and click on this little arrow at the top right corner and copy. Now I'm going to go into my questions. These are the questions earlier that we saw where we create our hypothesis, and I'm going to insert my beautiful chart. Now we're ready to go ahead and answer the last couple of questions in this example. So the weather forecast says the temperature will be 35 degrees today. Estimate the sales the operator will have today. All right, so 35 degrees Celsius is right here, so I'm going to use the fact that this trend line is extended to extrapolate the information. So moving all the way up to 35, I see that I have a dot right here, and it seems to be, I'm going to trace that over here, but it's between these two grid lines, so I have to sort of count, right? So if the entire way of my major grid lines is from 800 and 1,000, then halfway is 900. Right? So, but it's not exactly on the line. It's about halfway between that and the next one. So it would be 900, 950, 1,000. So I'm halfway between 900 and 950. I'm going to say about $925 if I had to estimate from my graph, just by going up to 35 and then tracing all the way over. So we're done that. That was extrapolation. Let's look at D. If the operator were to make $500, what would you estimate the temperature to be on that day? All right, so instead of giving me information about the temperature, they're giving me the sales number, right? So remember, if this is 400, this line right here, and this is 600, exactly in between that will be 500. So I'm going to go over, all the way over to my line of best fit, because I don't actually have a data point for that temperature, or for that sales point. Right, and then I'm going to trace down, and it may be helpful for you to actually draw permanent lines on this. So if I trace down and I go all the way, and I had to estimate, that looks like it's about 22 degrees Celsius. Right, so that's my estimation. Of course, if the graph were a little bigger, I could probably get some better values. But, that was my interpolation, looking inside the data at a piece of data that I did not collect. Hope that helps. If you have any questions as you're working through your homework and trying to make these graphs online, then please let me know. I'll be happy to help you.